So this is a continuation on our discussion about constitutionalism and absolutism. You guys have already seen and looked at both how the Dutch Republic was working together to establish their commercial revolution, as well as how the English went through their struggles in the English Civil War, as well as the Glorious Revolution, in order to establish a constitutional monarchy. Now in France, on the other hand, absolutism was established, and this is best personified uh, by Louis XIV and his reign there. Now let's go back in history a little bit and remember that the religious civil wars in the 16th century in France, they ended when Henry of Navarre, who became Henry IV, came to the throne, and he married Marguerite, the daughter of Catherine de' Medici and Henry II. Remember the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, where the Catholics slaughtered all the Huguenots in Paris. Henry IV, remember, became king, and he said that Paris was worth a mass, so he converted from Protestantism to Catholicism. But in addition to that, he created the Edict of Nantes, which ended the religious conflict and gave some sort of autonomy to the Huguenots in their regions of Paris, or of France, excuse me. He worked to restore central authority, and he founded the Bourbon dynasty, which ruled for about 200 years in France, and they became one of the most powerful countries in the world. A very important person for you to know is Cardinal Richelieu. He's a Catholic cardinal. He was a minister to Louis XIII, and he really created the supremacy of the king and of France in Europe. He destroyed the nobles' power. He taxed without the Estates General, so he had ignored any type of constitutionalism and taxed how he wanted to tax, and he led France in the 30 Years' War. Louis XIII was in control, but really Cardinal Richelieu was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Then Louis XIV came to power, and he is really the epitome of absolutism. He survived the Fronde, which were rebellions among the French nobles between 1649 and 1652. And it's at that point that he and Richelieu decided that we really need to control the nobles in order to make sure we're safe. So he is the essential absolute monarch. He believes he rules by divine right, and he builds the extravagant palace of Versailles. He never calls the Estates General, so he's looking to control everything by himself. He's known as the Sun King, and this is one of his more famous quotes. He says, "I am the state," which means what he says goes. So Colbert was his financial minister, and it improved trade. They improved trade and industry. They improved transportation all across France. But one thing that took a step back is they revoked the Edict of Nantes, which obviously hurt the economy, made people scared for their lives, maybe feared that the 30 Years' War was going to come back and destroy things. The French had an ambitious foreign policy at this time, and at his death, France was the leading continental nation in Europe. People in all courts across Europe, they all spoke French. They adopted French fashion. So France had become the most important leader in Europe. Here's a little tree. We're going to skip that. All right, in Spain, on the other hand, you had Philip II, who is the son of Charles V. Now, this should be a little bit of a review because we talked about him before. He marries Mary I of England. He built the building called El Escorial, which is a very kind of somber building, and that's the way he kind of ran his life. He built the Spanish Empire, and he helped defeat the Turks with Venice and the Pope. But he failed to suppress the Dutch revolt and failed to defeat England with the Spanish Armada. Okay, he produced an inefficient government, crushing tax burden, and a stagnant economy. And it's after Philip II that Spain kind of starts to dwindle in terms of a main power in Europe. Russia, on the other hand, is going to grow throughout these centuries and become a force to be reckoned with. In the 10th century, they do convert to Russian Orthodoxy, which is kind of the Eastern Orthodox religion. So it's different than Catholicism, different than the normal Protestants, and it's kind of their own branch of Christianity. From the 13th to the 15th century, the Mongols controlled Russia, and then in the 15th and the 16th centuries, Moscow led Russia. Ivan III was, or known as the Great, he ended Mongol domination and he extended territories, he subdued the nobles, and attained absolute power. Then Ivan IV, who was also known as the Terrible, was a grandson of Ivan the Great. He used great cruelty. He was the first to assume the title of Tsar, which just means Caesar in Russian, so you can think of Tsar as a Russian king. Michael Romanov was a grandnephew of Ivan the Terrible. He was chosen, he was actually kind of elected by an assembly of nobles in 1613, and this really began the Romanov dynasty that lasted for about 300 years. Peter the First, or Peter the Great, is someone you definitely need to know. He strengthened absolutism in Russia. He crushed revolted nobles. He extended the government's control over the church, and he pretty much forced Russia to westernize. He traveled around Western Europe. He went to all the great cities. He became a shipbuilder, and he traveled all around. And he brought a lot of these Western customs to Russia. As you can see in the bottom right-hand picture, he said all nobles need to cut off their beards. He also forced a lot of Russians, a lot of Russian peasants, to build a new seaport called St. Petersburg, which is on the Baltic Sea, so that they could have access to a warm water port. And then Catherine the Great was a very important person as well. This is a little bit later on. She's the German wife of Peter III and eventually has him removed, and then she really grows Russia and extends it south to the Black Sea, west by taking over parts of Poland, along with Austria, as you'll see on this next map, and we'll talk about this more in class. Prussia, the Hohenzollern rule in the 15th century. There's nobles from the Berlin area that ruled Prussia through an autocratic government, well-trained army, and they ruled for about 500 years, and in 1871 they actually unified Germany. One important thing to know about the Prussians is that they are definitely army-based, military-based. Remember the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648, the four phases, the First War for balance of power, and this really shifts everything in the Holy Roman Empire, and it allows Brandenburg, Prussia, to become the leading power in this territory. Frederick the William, the Great Elector, he pursued mercantilism. We'll talk about that more in class. He promoted industry and agriculture, emphasized duty and honesty, organized a strong army, and waged successful wars against the Swedes, Poles, and Austrians. So this tradition of military in Prussia is going to last for a long time. The early Habsburgs, they're around in the 13th century. They're originally the lesser feudal lords in Alsace, which is in France and Germany, Switzerland and southern Germany. Then Rudolf I, he's from the Habsburgs, and he's German. He's governed Austria for 600 years, with one exception. He headed the Holy Roman Empire until its end in 1806. And they really controlled the Holy Roman Empire through marriage and alliances. The Habsburg reverses. Through the 13th and 18th century, they failed to halt the Protestant movement or Reformation. They didn't defeat France in the 30 Years' War, so their power is really starting to wane in the later centuries here. But some achievements that they had is that they did defeat the Turks and stopped the Ottoman advance at Vienna. And by the 18th century, they controlled many nationalities. As you can see on this map, you can see their orangeness over here, and they control a lot of territories. And we'll see that this Austro-Hungarian Empire lasts until after World War I. So nation-states' achievements. They weakened forces tending to disunite a country. They provided strong central government, as we saw with Louis XIV and absolutism. And they generally furthered growth of a national state and economy. But some of its weaknesses is it made nations depend on the ability of one person, which often sacrificed national well-being for an autocrat's personal wishes, right? These guys lived lives of luxury. They fought costly wars, and they often disregarded the needs of the rights of the common people. So absolutism is attacked by intellectuals and enlightenment, which we'll be looking at here pretty soon.